In the bitter winter of 1259, Polish peasants stumbled upon a nightmare. Not of the future, but of the past, frozen solid. Mongol scouts, once the terror of continents, stood upright on their horses like macabre ice sculptures. Man and beast locked in death, eyes pecked clean by ravens. But the locals? They didn't bury them. They turned them into a carnival. Imagine it, market stalls mushrooming around these frozen giants, hot soup steaming, children not cowering, but pelting snowballs at the former conquerors, dogs relieving themselves on the legs of warriors who'd once made empires tremble. One audacious merchant even hung a sign from a dead Mongol's outstretched arm, advertising bread not made from human flesh, unlike Mongol provisions. This wasn't fear anymore. This was raw, seething contempt. For 2 decades, Europe had lived in a waking nightmare. They remembered Legnica, where Mongol warriors filled 9 sacks with European airs. They remembered drinking cups fashioned from children's skulls. They remembered 100,000 knights slaughtered in 3 days, their steel armor tearing like paper against Mongol arrows. Cities where only cats survived, because starving refugees had devoured even the rats. Europe knew terror. It had learned it intimately. But in 1259, when the Golden Horde returned to Poland, expecting another feast of conquest, they found something new, something terrifyingly different. An enemy forged in the fires of their own brutality. The Mongols were about to discover what happens when you teach peaceful farmers how to be monsters. They had, unwittingly, created their own executioners. The Mongol war machine was, at its heart, a creature of the horse. Each warrior rode with 5 to 10 mounts, constantly rotating them to maintain their terrifying speed. They drank their blood, wore their hides, carved their bones into arrows. A Mongol without a horse? He wasn't a warrior. He was just a man in fur, stranded hundreds of miles from home. This was their greatest strength, and their most vulnerable Achilles' heel. Duke Bolesław the Chaste, a name that would soon echo with chilling irony, had spent 20 years studying this weakness. 3 months before the invasion, Polish forces unleashed the most extensive scorched earth campaign in medieval history. They poisoned every well with rotting corpses. They burned every blade of grass for 50 meters. They salted grazing lands with lime and arsenic. But their masterpiece of malice, the gift horses, beautiful Polish mares infected with glanders, a disease that rips through horse populations like wildfire, causing pus-filled abscesses until the animals drown in their own fluids. Biological warfare, medieval style. When General Nogai Khan crossed the Vistula in December 1259 with 30,000 riders, his scouts returned with disturbing news. The land ahead was dead, not conquered, not abandoned. Dead. Villages stood empty. Fields were blackened ash. Every well was a charnel house, bloated horse corpses bobbing in the poisoned water. The Polish population had vanished like smoke, taking every last grain of wheat. They'd even dug up their graveyards, denying the Mongols even the calcium of ancient bones. By the second week, the gift horses began their gruesome work. Mongol mounts coughed blood, their necks swelling with burst abscesses, spreading infection through their ranks. Unaware of disease transmission, the Mongols moved sick animals to the rear, ensuring the plague devoured their entire herd. Within 3 weeks, hundreds of horses died daily, leaving a trail of festering corpses that wolves followed like a moving feast. Then, the ghosts arrived. Duke Bolesław hadn't recruited knights. He'd enlisted peasants, men who knew every forest path, who could move like specters in the winter snow, men who had spent 2 decades dreaming of vengeance for murdered families. These weren't soldiers. They were hunters, armed with one chilling directive: kill Mongols like you kill wolves. No honor, no mercy, just death. Their tactics were devastating in their simplicity. Polish raiders would stalk Mongol scouting parties, waiting until the deepest hours before dawn. They wouldn't fight. They would simply cut horse throats, silently, efficiently, and vanish back into the trees. A Mongol warrior might wake to find his 5 horses dead, their blood turning the snow to crimson slush, no enemy in sight. Without his mounts in enemy territory, in winter, he was already a dead man walking. It just took a few days of frozen forest to confirm it. One unit of 500 men woke to find every single horse's throat cut, arranged in a grotesque circle around their camp. Done so silently, even the sentries noticed nothing. The message was clear: we can kill you whenever we want. The psychological impact was annihilating. Warriors who had conquered half the world were now afraid to sleep. Mongols traveled light, depending on raid and forage. So the Poles began leaving abandoned caches, barrels of mead, sacks of grain, preserved meats, all laced with hemlock and wolfsbane. Not enough to kill instantly, but enough to cause agonizing stomach cramps and bloody diarrhea. One Mongol captain, Badar, wrote to Nogai Khan, "The enemy is nowhere and everywhere. We conquer empty villages and rule over ghosts. My men, excrement blood and sea demons. The horses eat each other's manes from hunger. This land is cursed." By January 1260, the situation was desperate. Surviving horses gnawed on tree bark, then their own dung, then each other. Warriors, once nourished by mare's milk and horse blood, watched their mounts collapse from starvation, too weak even to be butchered for meat. Poland had become a desert that devoured armies. Then came Sandomierz. The trap finally snapped shut. Duke Bolesław had been retreating for weeks, always just out of reach, leaving a trail of poisoned supplies and dead land. The Mongols, now perhaps 15,000 strong from their original 30,000, pursued him towards Sandomierz on the Vistula. They thought they had him cornered. They were wrong. The Duke had spent 2 months preparing a killing field specifically designed for Mongols. The Battle of Sandomierz was not a battle. It was a slaughter wearing the mask of one. The Mongols approached, seeing the Polish army in traditional formation, knights, infantry, banners flying. It looked like the European battles they'd crushed 100 times. Nogai Khan ordered traditional tactics, a feigned retreat to draw the knights out, then a devastating arrow shower. But when the Mongol light cavalry performed their feigned retreat, something unprecedented happened. The Polish knights didn't follow. They simply stood, shields up, waiting. The Mongols wheeled around for their arrow assault and discovered why. Their horses, already weakened, couldn't gallop. Deep trenches, hidden under a thin layer of snow and branches, swallowed them. Horses broke legs by the dozens, throwing riders into concealed pits filled with sharpened stakes smeared with human feces, ensuring any wound became septic. The trap was perfect, countering every Mongol advantage. As Mongol cavalry floundered, Polish crossbowmen emerged from concealed positions. They weren't aiming at warriors. They shot the horses, every single horse, methodically, efficiently, like farmers culling diseased cattle. The Mongols, watching their mounts die, realized they were now infantry in enemy territory, in winter hundreds of miles from support. Then the peasants arrived. Thousands of them, not with swords, but with farming implements, flails for grain, hooks for hay, hammers for horseshoes. Duke Bolesław had promised them something extraordinary. 1 silver penny for every Mongol ear, 2 pennies for a thumb, a gold ducat for a Mongol commander's head. What followed was less combat, more harvest. The Mongol warriors, trained from childhood for mounted warfare, tried to form defensive circles on foot, but they were exhausted, many still suffering from poisoning, wearing armor designed for horseback, not ground combat. The peasants swarmed them like ants on dying beetles. They used harvest scythe to cut tendons, grain flails to crush skulls, pruning hooks to drag warriors into the mud for hammers and stones. A Polish chronicler wrote, "The Tartars died not like warriors, but like sheep in slaughter season. Our peasants worked in teams, turning killing into a craft like threshing wheat." The ear harvest, as it became known, lasted 3 hours. Some practical peasants cut off both ears, figuring they could sell the extras to less successful hunters. Others collected Mongol fingers to make necklaces, selling them as protection charms. Mongol commanders, identified by silk undershirts, were kept alive just long enough for peasants to negotiate who got the bounty. Then they were beheaded with the same axes used to slaughter pigs, their screams mixing with peasant work songs. It was the harvest they'd waited 20 years for, and they sang as they reaped. Nogai Khan himself survived, but only because Boleslav wanted him to. The Duke had a special message to send. The Mongol general was stripped naked, painted with pig blood, and forced to ride a donkey backward through 20 Polish villages. In each village, locals were permitted to cut off one small piece of him, a finger joint, a piece of ear, a toe, but not enough to kill him. By the time he reached the final village, he was a living mosaic of mutilation, begging for death. Instead, they castrated him with sheep shears and sent him back to the Golden Horde. The message was delivered: this is what Europe does to invaders now. Meanwhile, at Kressenbrunn in Austria, King Ottokar II of Bohemia conducted his own extermination campaign. The Battle of Kressenbrunn in July 1260 was different. Heavily armored knights against Mongol cavalry in open field. But the Bohemians had learned. Instead of charging, they formed hollow squares, bristling with pikes, mobile fortresses. Swiss mercenaries with crossbows created kill zones that horses couldn't penetrate. Mongol arrows bounced off improved plate armor. Cavalry charges impaled themselves on pike walls. Their traditional tactics were obsolete. The Bohemian heavy cavalry, held in reserve, waited until Mongol horses were exhausted from futile charges. Then they attacked. These weren't the old knights slaughtered at Legnica. These wore full plate, impenetrable to Mongol arrows, rode massive destriers that trampled Mongol ponies, and wielded war hammers designed to crush lamella armor. The killing was so thorough that Ottokar ordered his men to stop taking heirs. There were too many to count. Instead, they piled Mongol heads into pyramids along the main trade route from Vienna to Prague. Over 50 markers, each containing hundreds of skulls. But the most horrifying fate awaited Mongol stragglers who fled into the Carpathian Mountains. Winter there is brutal. The 3,000 survivors found themselves trapped. No food, no horses, temperatures dropping to -30 degrees Celsius. Polish and Hungarian mountain villages had been warned. They blocked passes with fallen trees, destroyed bridges, and waited. Starvation in mountains follows a predictable pattern. First, the leather, belts, boots, saddles. Then frozen horse carcasses, then bark, pine needles. Finally, by week 4, each other. A Hungarian patrol found a Mongol camp where the occupants had clearly turned to cannibalism. Bodies were butchered with the same precision Mongols used on sheep. Major muscle groups removed, bones cracked for marrow, even skin cooked into crackling. Survivors had established rules. The sick were eaten first, then the wounded, then lots were drawn. A Mongol warrior's journal, recovered from his frozen corpse, contained a chilling confession. "We ate Timur yesterday. He was my brother in arms for 6 years. His liver was diseased, black with spots, but we ate it anyway. Tomorrow they will share me. The mountains are full of demons that look like peasants." The mountain villages indeed watched and waited. When Mongol groups became weak enough, peasants attacked with hunting bows and boar spears. Mostly, they just let winter do its work. In spring, perfectly preserved frozen Mongols were found, their faces twisted in final agony. Bodies were stripped of valuables and left for wolves. Some villages developed a gruesome economy around Mongol corpses, harvesting tendons for bowstrings, hair for brushes, and skulls for drinking cups, a bitter reversal of what Mongols had done to Europeans. Every household had Mongol skull bowls for feast days. The few hundred Mongols who made it through the mountains faced a final horror. The slave markets. The Venetians, ever pragmatic, established a robust trade. These weren't warriors anymore. They were broken, starving, often mutilated survivors who had eaten human flesh. Venetians bought them for almost nothing from Hungarian peasants, then sold them to Egyptian Mamluks, who found ironic satisfaction in enslaving the sons of men who had enslaved half the world. The slave ships were floating hells, packed into cargo holds, chained to prevent suicide, fed just enough to survive the voyage. Many went mad from the reversal of fortune. Children received different treatment. Mongol boys under 10 were castrated and sold as eunuchs to guard harems. The survival rate from crude castration was perhaps 1 in 3. Survivors were trained to forget they were ever Mongol, raised to serve the very civilizations their fathers had tried to destroy. Mongol girls were sold to brothels across the Mediterranean, marketed specifically as daughters of the conquerors for clients who took sadistic pleasure in dominating the offspring of feared warriors. Venetian merchant Marco Sanudo recorded, "The Tartars make poor slaves. They refuse to work. They attack their overseers with their teeth like wild dogs, and many hang themselves with their own chains." Back in Poland, Duke Bolesław ordered a monument built from Mongol bones. At Sandomierz, Polish peasants constructed a church. Its foundation mortar was mixed with ground Mongol bones. Its walls were decorated with Mongol skulls arranged in crosses. Its altar was made from the single stone where Nogai Khan had been castrated. They called it the Church of Divine Vengeance. It stood for 200 years until embarrassed church officials, deeming it un-Christian, destroyed it. The immediate military impact was decisive. The Mongol invasion force of 30,000 had been essentially exterminated. Perhaps 500 many missing oars, fingers, or other parts made it back to the Golden Horde, telling tales of poisoned earth and enemies who fought without honor. But Europe wasn't done teaching lessons. News of the victories triggered what historians call the Mongol Hunt of 1261–1263. Suddenly, every minor lord wanted Mongol heads for their castle walls. Bounty hunters specialized in tracking down stragglers. The Teutonic Knights sent cleansing parties deep into Eastern Europe, finding and exterminating Mongol camps with creative brutality. They would capture scouts, force them to reveal camp locations, then use them as living torches, covering them in pitch and setting them ablaze before sending them running back into their own camps. The Hungarian Baron Bela preferred impalement, lining his borders with Mongol warriors on stakes. The Golden Horde made one last, desperate attempt at retaliation in 1262. A force of 10,000 riders was sent to raid Poland. They made it exactly 30 miles past the border before Polish peasants' early warning system. Church bells ringing across the land, alerted every village for 50 miles. The earth was scorched ahead of them, wells were poisoned, and Polish wolf packs of mounted peasants shadowed them constantly. These weren't soldiers. They were farmers who had learned to fight like Mongols, adopting hit-and-run tactics, but with intimate knowledge of the land. They'd strike at night, kill sentries, steal horses, poison supplies, then vanish into forests the Mongols didn't know. The Mongol commander, Bundai, reported, "We are not fighting an army, but the land itself. Every tree hides an archer. Every stream is poisoned. Every village is empty but watching. My men are afraid to sleep, afraid to eat, afraid to drink water. This is not war. It is being slowly digested by a hostile country. After 2 weeks of this psychological torture, the Mongols retreated. As they withdrew, Polish peasants followed, picking off stragglers. The final insult came at the border. Polish children, some as young as 7, stood on hills throwing rocks at the retreating army, singing mocking songs about the brave horsemen who ran from farmers. The Mongols, who had conquered the greatest empires on earth, were being laughed at by children. The Golden Horde never attempted another serious invasion of Central Europe. The transformation was complete. In 1241, Europe had trembled before Mongol horsemen like sheep before wolves. By 1263, European peasants wore necklaces of Mongol finger bones and drank from Mongol skulls while their children played games called Hunt the Tartar with captured helmets. The invincible had become the hunted. The conquerors had become commodities in slave markets, and the terror of the steppes had learned to fear the sound of Christian church bells. The myth of Mongol invincibility was dead. Killed by farmers with pitchforks who'd learned that the secret to defeating monsters was to become something worse. Stories filtered back along the Silk Road. The great Mongol warriors defeated by European farmers, their generals castrated like sheep, their children sold in markets, their bones ground into mortar for churches. Other peoples who'd submitted to Mongol rule began to wonder if Polish peasants could destroy the invincible Mongol army with poisoned wells and farming tools. What were they so afraid of? Within a generation, the Mongol Empire began its long fragmentation. The Yuan dynasty in China would fall, the Ilkhanate in Persia would collapse, the Golden Horde would shrink and divide. The spell was broken. Today, archaeologists still find mass graves along the Carpathian mountain passes. Mongol warriors who died from starvation and cold, their bones bearing teeth marks, silent testimony to cannibalism. In Polish museums, you can see the preserved harvest tools, modified scythes and flails, specifically designed for killing dismounted Mongols, passed down as heirlooms. Some rural Polish churches still have foundation stones that, when tested, contain unusual amounts of human calcium. The ground bones of Mongol warriors are mixed into mortar. The Mongols called their empire the Eternal Blue Sky. But they discovered that even the eternal sky ends at the edge of a Polish peasant's scythe. They taught Europe how to be monsters, and Europe had learned the lesson too well. The last Mongol to leave Poland alive in 1263 was a young scout named Kutus. He had lost his ears, nose, and fingers to Polish peasants. He made it back to the Golden Horde and lived another 40 years, a living ghost, warning every young warrior about the land of death, where the earth itself was poisoned and farmers wore necklaces of Mongol bones. He ended every warning the same way. They say we were invincible. We were not. We were just men far from home who learned that teaching sheep to be wolves means one day the sheep will eat you. He was right. The Mongols had created their own executioners. They really should have stayed in the steppes where they belonged, instead of teaching peaceful farmers the art of systematic slaughter. Word count 3432, character count 21338.